Hi, and welcome back to 10 Kids, 2 Docs, Parenting Insights from Pediatrician Moms. I'm Dr. Sylvia Bank.
And I'm Dr. Vivian Carlin. Welcome back.
Welcome back. Our topic today is going to be how to encourage siblings to be friends with each other.
This will be a fun topic for us to discuss.
Let's jump in.
Welcome to the 10 Kids, 2 Docs podcast. Seasoned pediatricians and longtime friends, Sylvia Bank and Vivian Carlin have counseled thousands of parents and are raising 4 and 6 kids, respectively. Join these doctor moms as they incorporate fun and their combined wisdom and experience to share parenting insights for anyone looking for practical and trustworthy guidance. Please note that this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment from your doctor.
So, as many of our listeners know, you have 6 kids, I have 4 kids, and the dynamic between our children and how they interact with each other can really set the stage for the tone for the rest of the family, right?
Absolutely.
So, encouraging siblings to be friends actually wound up being quite a priority for me for having a good family tone and dynamic. So in my household, my oldest child is very easygoing and does have like a fun, silly streak in him.
Yeah.
So I think it definitely sets the tone in the
Yes,
family.
that oldest child does set the tone.
Yeah,
a little
bit.
Yeah.
A little bit of fun.
Yeah.
And my children are also close together in age, a little less than or a little more than 24 months apart from each other, all of them.
Yeah.
And I think when you have that type of spread in your children's age, it has the potential for them to truly be friends, right? Because they're going through similar common interests at the same time.
Yeah.
As opposed to over a 3-year age spread, then their overlap, at least when they're young, of commonality is less. So they have less points of contact to be true friends as little kids. That being said, when they're that close in age, they also have the potential to really fight with each other too, right? Because they want the same things. They compete for the same things.
Yeah.
So I think my spread and my age of my 4 children lends to the ability for them to be friends when they're young. Right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting because what you make me think of is that when I think of the tension points between my 6 children, which varied over time, it was generally with 2 children that were next to each other in age, right?
Like
and
2 years or less apart. Right.
It wasn't one that was like 3 down because they didn't really have the same things to be fighting over. Yes, This is so true.
So I do consider it like a curse and a blessing to have children so close together, because the blessing is they can truly be friends.
Yeah.
But the curse is the fighting can be more, right? And when I think about my children and I think about sibling rivalry point, that's not just like we're fighting over the same toy. It really came into play when a new baby came into the family and there was jealousy about the new baby.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because when there's a new baby, a new infant that needs a lot of maternal care, then the previous sibling or older sibling who was very attached to mom will get very jealous of that new baby and that new relationship.
Yeah.
So I think the most long-lasting sibling rivalry point that I can think of in my family was related to that baby jealousy that honestly can continue beyond infancy, right?
Yeah. Beyond when your baby was a baby.
Right.
Yeah.
But your youngest child will always be your baby because they were never displaced by another baby, right?
Yes. I think for me with my kids, they actually followed this pattern. And that was that sometime around age, I would say like 14 to 15, maybe 13, somewhere in there, the child would just be getting old enough that they would consider themselves one of the big kids. And this didn't happen with my oldest. She owns the place in our family where every child looks up to her and loves her, and no one fights with her, and no one ever has fought with her. And part of that is her personality, which is very similar to your oldest as well. So I credit her with that. I mean, they all just have always adored her and looked up to her. So she never had that bickering with anyone. But everybody else did. And it was this very characteristic pattern where sometime around age 14 or 15, this child would feel the need to be mean to the one just below them. And I think it was multifactorial. I mean, it was probably partially due to the fact that at that age, kids tend to be a little bit more moody in general.
Yeah. I mean, they're teenagers, right?
They're teenagers.
Early high school.
I think it was definitely also this, hey, I am now one of the big kids. I'm going to assert my dominance because you think that you're a big kid, even though you're only 2 years younger than me. You are still a little kid, right? And this happened from my second to my third, and then my third to my fourth, and then my fourth to my fifth.
Oh, interesting.
And now even a little bit from my fifth to my sixth. I'm almost out of the woods. But what I know now is that with every single one of them, they would have this phase for a year or two where that new teenager or young teenager could really lash out in this mean way to this younger sibling, where I would think like, oh no, like you're never going to be friends. You're going to hate each other for the rest of your lives. And then everybody would get older and grow up, and they would come back around, and now they're great friends.
Really?
So I kind of have this perspective of, okay, here's this necessary, pecking order, assertion of dominance that everybody's going to go through in such a large family. But then it comes to pass, and everybody's back to being friends. And I say that, I feel like part of the reason it's interesting for you and I to do this episode is because I have children who are very, very good friends. I mean, would say they're each other's best friends now as teenagers and young adults. And I'm so appreciative of that.
And this is a little tangential, but I think now in this season of life, I'm very mindful of giving them time to develop those relationships apart from me.
Oh, absolutely.
And that wasn't true when they were little.
Yes.
But it is. Yes.
Involved in everything when they were little.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And what, to that end, one of the tricks that I have that my kids know and love is that if they come to me, and it's often at like 11 o'clock at night, if they come to me and they're like, hey, Mom, we just kind of wanted to go run to the McDonald's drive-thru and talk. Do you mind if can you give us some cash to go do that? I will almost always say yes.
Right. Because it's facilitating their relationship with each other, right?
Yes. I think my older ones have really figured this out, because now with the younger ones, because now my older ones are driving and whatnot, they'll say, hey, Mom, I had this idea that I really wanted to take so-and-so out on this like one-on-one date, so to speak, where we would go to this place that we both love for dinner. Would you mind funding that? And I will still almost always say yes. Because soft spot, I can insist. Like, okay, you're going to take your younger brother out just one-on-one time with his older sibling? Yes. There's other things in my parenting that, I could have done better or changed, but somehow we managed to have our children be very, very good friends. And it makes such a difference in our family dynamic. And I'm so thankful for it.
Mine too. I mean, as they're emerging through adolescence and into young adulthood, my children have also maintained a good friendship with each other, and a friendship that they have that is outside of their relationship with me.
So even having children now that are very good friends, we've described some, very classic and typical argumentation or argument points between our children. But I think we should turn our attention to looking back and even still with my younger kids, some of the things that we implemented in our homes to really encourage them to be friends.
Right. Yeah. So let's jump into those points.
Okay.
So, one of the things that I did early on when my children were younger and they started fighting with each other, over a toy, over a situation. I like to coin these phrases in my household. One of them I described was a point of no return, where, you can fight with someone, it's mine. But sometimes that level of bickering can cross a line where it really becomes nasty. And for some families, it winds up being physical, like they start hitting each other or whatever. And to kind of recognize when you're just kind of bickering versus you've kind of crossed a line where you're really hurting someone. And to make my children be mindful of, once you've crossed that line, you have regret, you wish you didn't do it. You feel bad, they feel bad. That point of no return, if too many of those episodes happen, then that can undermine your overall relationship with your sibling.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point, Sylvia, because as you and I have described, it's not like our children didn't fight. They did, but helping them, guiding them to not cross that threshold of going too far probably really helped in the long run, allowing them to develop such deep friendships later on as they grew up.
The other new terminology that we started in our family was this phenomenon that takes place with especially younger siblings related to older siblings, where, a younger sibling is listening to the older siblings talk. They want to be so a part of that big
Yes.
kid group.
Yes. Yeah.
And one way that they can get a comment in or be heard is by correcting the older siblings' verbiage. I mean, someone who is trying to tell a story, it's much harder to generate all those thoughts and speech and coherency. But if a younger sibling is just listening and dissecting every word they're saying and they misspeak, it's the way that the younger sibling can jump into the conversation and say, "Don't you mean mom and not dad?" Like, just like a correction.
Yeah.
That,
Yeah.
you can see the tendency for that to happen in a family. And we kind of saw this pattern, because as I outlined in previous episodes, we're pattern matching family.
Yes. Very analytical.
It happens. The younger sibling thinks they're part of the conversation. And what winds up happening is the older sibling is really annoyed
Yeah. Yeah.
at the younger sibling for that. And
Yeah.
instead of creating a good dynamic between older and younger sibling, it kind of undermines that. So we coined this phrase in our household called, we described this phenomenon and we allowed our children to name it. So we had a code word.
Yeah.
So when it happened, we could say the code word.
Yeah.
And then everyone knew, oh, we need to back down.
Yeah.
So the code word and the kids were little, the code word we came up with was doorknob.
Okay.
So whenever anyone did this unnecessary correction, we would just say doorknob, and then that would be the end of it. And it kind of turned into a little bit of a joke. But the implementation of this correction was in a large part to create good dynamic between older sibling and younger sibling, and not have a point of annoyance where the older sibling is always annoyed with their younger sibling.
Yes. That's funny, because I do think one of the principles in encouraging siblings to be friends, but it's almost a little bit of just kind of creating family culture, is to use creativity to your advantage to come up with some silly things that are almost like inside jokes.
It is an inside joke, right?
Yeah.
Do you have any examples of things that you implemented in your family to encourage siblings to be friends?
Yeah. So I think the biggest one for me, and something that I've put a lot of thought into, is I've been blessed with, I'm very thankful for children who are very different from one another. I mean, and part of that is certainly through adoption, right? Like when you have a different genetic pool, that lends itself to differences. But even just amongst all 6 of my kids, I mean, I have the extremes of range in height. I have every hair color that is out there. I have, including one redhead. We have different skin colors. I have some children who just have that kind of natural athleticism, and some that don't. I have some children that can sing and some that can't. Like, I just have a huge range. And I think the one that probably runs the risk of being the highest area of contention is that I have some where school comes very easily to them, and some with learning disabilities. And I feel like Eric and I have been very, very purposeful in making sure that the culture in our family is that each person is of equal value and worth. I mean, a lot of that would stem back to our faith, that each one is created by God and is of equal worth in his eyes. But we also need to be we can't just be preaching that. We need to be practicing that in our home, that there can never be a scenario where a child is placed on a
scale.
Or of higher value because they did this well at this activity and another child didn't. And I knew very early on there was going to be a lot of discrepancy in what kind of accolades they would get when they went outside of our house, right? Like, my one who is very athletic would easily be the one who's picked at PE first for the team. And I might have another one who's picked last in PE, right? My one who academics comes very easily to could just memorize everything they needed to know for the test and easily recall that information. And I have another one that would, despite their incredible hard work, would still really struggle with that recall. So that had to be continually mitigated in our home, and a reminding that each one has incredible worth and value and has a different purpose for what they're meant to do in life, you know, and that there's a beauty in that, right?
Yes.
That enriches our family,
right?
The fact that we're not all the same, that we're all different. So I feel like if I could only give one piece of advice, that is the one thing that I had to be so careful to make sure that my siblings no, that my children could grow into friendship with each other instead of any type of rivalry or one-upping or feeling better than another.
Right. I mean, this is the classic where, you hear of classic, death of a salesman, 50s families, where the parent will say to one sibling,
Yeah.
why can't you be more like your brother? Or
Yes.
why can't you be more like your sister?
Maybe a more relevant example would be like Thor and Loki. Just keeping it real, not sure how many of us have read or remember Death of a Salesman.
Just that thought of your parent. Let's just go from a child's perspective. Your parent favors the
Yeah.
characteristics of another sibling. Imagine what that creates in both children.
Well-
One who is kind of felt lesser than, jealous, and
Yes.
competitive with that, and kind of competing for their parents' affection
Yes.
because they're not like that sibling. And then the one who is favored, can be feeling like, I didn't ask for this. I didn't want this. Like it creates a negative sibling dynamic between siblings when the parents really favor one child over the other, right?
Well, and to take it a step further, that recognition that the world, quote unquote, is going to favor,
Yes.
the world may favor one over the
Mhm.
other. And they can set each themselves up for comparison and competition without the parent even doing anything.
Right.
But if the parent can actively be working against that attitude in the home because they recognize it as a risk, I think that makes a difference.
No, definitely. I like that idea. One of the things that I, very early on when the children were young, that I felt was really important was the way that we discipline them. It's very easy. You walk into a situation, there's a fight ensuing, there's an older sibling, and it sometimes is the default of, you guys are fighting, you're older, you should know better, right? And I feel like the older sibling can develop resentment towards that. And in order to be mindful of that in our family, we really spent some time being effective, judge and jury in a conflict situation. And that reduces the burden of the older sibling getting in trouble all the time. One of the things also I implemented early on is transition times when you're trying to get them to bed, when you're trying to get out of the door to get to the school bus. Those can be difficult parenting points, right? And one of the things that I've seen, in my experience as a pediatrician is a scenario like first one upstairs wins, for brushing the teeth. It's kind of making these comments like first one out the door, like to in order to inspire movement in these very difficult parental points. It makes surface sense, but when you really think about it, if you start having them compete with each other on these little things, it doesn't necessarily lend to the goal of siblings being friends with each other.
Yeah, that's a good point.
The last point that I think I've noticed when trying to encourage my kids to be friends with each other is, especially in families where we have a lot of children, I make it very clear in my family that it was my and dad's choice to have these children. They are our responsibility. And when you have a larger spread between your children, it can really come to a point where the older sibling winds up being more responsible for the youngest. Sometimes it's a necessity.
Yes.
When parents are working and the oldest sibling is childcare. There are situations in families where the oldest sibling really needs to step up for the entire family. But for smaller, littler things, I was very mindful of not requiring the older sibling to be responsible for their younger sibling, because that can be a point of resentment.
I mean, we should do an episode on chores and family responsibility, which I think is super important in family dynamic as well, is children establishing the responsibility that they have within the home. But I see what you're saying. If all of their responsibility relies on taking care of a younger sibling, that there's definitely a potential for resentment there over that, which could lead to resentment towards the younger sibling, not even necessarily just towards the parent.
Right.
And to be very cautious in that situation.
And that may undermine their ability to form friendship
later,
which is harder when they're further apart in age anyway, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I think if I had to summarize this, you and I are both describing the fruit of really years of intentionality on this. And so I would encourage parents with younger children to, even at those young ages, be just thinking about parenting towards an eventual outcome of your children being friends. And these are some of the tricks and suggestions that we've given, but ways in your own parenting that you see that is really building that relationship. And then also expect there are going to be times where there are more hot spots with bickering, as I described with my children.
Certain ages, certain spreads, right?
Certain stresses in the family. And that most often those do pass under parenting that is, again, correcting them and leading them on this path of eventual friendship.
Yeah. No, this has been a great conversation today.
Yeah, this was fun.
This is 10 Kids, 2 Docs. I'm Dr. Sylvia Bank.
And I'm Dr. Vivian Carlin. We'll see you next time.
See you next time.
Thank you for listening to 10 Kids, 2 Docs, hosted and created by Sylvia Bank and Vivian Carlin. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and recommend our podcast to other listeners. Visit our website at 10kids2docs.com, where you can find links to social media and leave comments or suggestions. Back next week with more topics in parenting.